call yourself Chernobyl? Because I look at you, you look like you're a couple vitamins away from a chemical disaster.
Marquis D.
Alright, shove it squad, we've got a big issue to talk about today. Top 10 Wrestling recently made a video saying that Jesse Neal was the worst TNA wrestler of all time. And whilst the man with a mohawk was terrible, I have to call Tom out on this. He can't get away with it. Tom, you have screwed up so badly here. You are completely wrong. There were loads worse than Jesse Neal. He was just a job guy. He didn't have any major mic time storylines or matches. Have you even watched TNA before? Wes Briscoe, Garrett Bischoff, A1, Anarchia, Tyrus, Chris Melendez, Murphy, Jay Bradley, Chavo Guerrero, David Young. There. That's 10 off the top of my head who are worse than Jesse Neal. Anyway, to all you guys watching and Top 10 Wrestling, let me introduce you to the real worst TNA wrestler of all time. A terrible haircut, can barely talk, so large that he can barely move, competed in TNA for 6 years and not a single good match, was pushed as a monster, and he's so ugly that he ended up having to have his face covered up as to not scare away the audience. This man is Rob Terry, the Welsh Roider. And Tom, you and your opinions can shove it because I'm the king around here. Rob Terry is the worst TNA wrestler of all time. Before we start, I don't want to hear anyone leaving comments saying, "Oh, he's probably not on steroids." You don't know what you're talking about, Marky. Trust me, I know gym guys. I've been in there for 8 years. I know what I'm talking about more than a lot of people when it comes to this. This guy is roided up to the ass, and he probably shoves them right up there every morning. Now don't get me wrong, you can inject 1,000,000 steroids and still not look like Rob Terry. He obviously worked incredibly hard in the gym. But we're here to talk about his wrestling career, which was terrible by the way. So before you comment, just think about what you're saying. Are you a gym guy? Are you really educated to comment on that? You cannot believe everything you read and hear. Scott Steiner has claimed he does not take steroids, just let that sink in for a second. There is something called an off cycle for people who take steroids, and that's when these guys compete in competitions and claim not to be on any gear. Rob Terry won the 2017 Natural Mr. Olympia this way. So please, you are just going to look stupid, so shut up or I'll smack you one, let's get on with it. Rob Terry was in WWE Developmental in 2007, but soon common sense prevailed and they dropped him from the company. According to Chris Jericho, he wanted to bring Terry up to the main roster in 2008 and have Rob be his protege. Instead, this role was given to Garrison Cade. Rob Terry and Chris Jericho are the complete opposites. One is skinny, one is huge. One is great on the mic, the other is a complete embarrassment who can barely string a coherent sentence together. One is a legend in wrestling, and one will forever be branded by the Hawk as a complete failure, not only in TNA but in life. So because the WWE released him, it didn't take long for TNA to snatch him up, as they do with a lot of WWE releases, whilst achieving varying results. He was initially put with the newly formed British Invasion faction. Poor Douglas Williams, he had a difficult job on his hands, as both Magnus and Rob Terry were pretty new to the wrestling business. TNA obviously had a lot of faith in Williams to entrust him with looking after these two guys, but this isn't a video about him, so shut up or I hit you with a brick. Terry was the backup for the British Invasion. He mostly just stood around looking stupid behind them. TNA showed pretty early on that they were interested in trying to make a star out of Rob Terry, as he attacked Hernandez and stole his Feast or Fired briefcase, which entitled the owner to a world title shot. Hernandez was written off TV because of this attack, whilst this big lummox constantly appeared with his briefcase on TV. Magnus and Williams usually did the tag matches, and Terry would just stand on the outside of the ring looking like a gormless moron. Whilst Jesse Neal was bad, TNA fans only had to endure Jesse Neal for 2 years. Rob Terry was featured constantly for 6 years, and there wasn't a single positive thing to say about him during this time. The British Invasion joined the World Elite, and it merged with the Main Event Mafia. Terry was terrible in all his matches, and would usually cause his team to lose, but commentary constantly ignored this fact, and talked up what a monster Rob Terry is. Hernandez eventually returned and beat Rob Terry on pay-per-view in 9 seconds, so what was the point? Terry then started a losing streak, because that always gets a wrestler over. Terry would eventually get another briefcase as he won a shot at the X Division title. Terry then won his first and only gold in TNA, as whilst competing in a house show in Wales he managed to capture the global title, a completely worthless belt. Terry then went after the X Division title, but Douglas Williams forced Terry to hand the shot over to him, and he beat Amazing Red for the X Division title. Rob Terry grew tired of how Magnus and Williams were treating him, and he turned face and left the British Invasion. For the whole of 2010, TNA tried desperately to get this guy over as a face, but nobody wanted to see him and his stupid haircut. They pushed him as an unstoppable monster, and they tried to get over how nuts this guy was by having Homicide hit him square in his big roid head with an unprotected chair shot. This idiot agreed to do it, and he ended up with a concussion because of it, and nobody even remembers it happening, so what was the point? They had him feud with Orlando Jordan next, where Orlando Jordan was in love with Terry, and Orlando Jordan stalked him. They even had a life-size cardboard cutout of Rob Terry. It was completely stupid and it was uncomfortable viewing to say the least. Orlando Jordan really pushed the boundaries of what was acceptable in wrestling, and unfortunately the fans couldn't get into it. Eric Bischoff was a massive fan of the guy and thought it would be very popular. Terry continued his winning streak with quick squash matches, but there was never anything interesting going on in his matches. People started to refer to Rob Terry matches as toilet break matches. Or, if you were like me, you continued watching the TNA show and just pissed all over the TV screen when Rob Terry's face appeared. He eventually lost the title to AJ Styles, and we all celebrated as it seemed like the Freak's run was finally over on TV, as his TV time became limited. TNA started using him more and more infrequently, especially when the Immortal storyline started up, and at the end of 2010 he became the bodyguard for Fortune. Yes, that's right. AJ Styles, Bobby Roode, James Storm, Kazarian, and they were guarded by Rob Terry. He continued to be regarded as a joke during his time, and was often just in the background with Gunner and Murphy, who were also regarded as replaceable faction members. They were the grunts, the worst members of Immortal, and nobody cared about them. The only thing Rob Terry was involved with around this time was a mini feud with Scott Steiner over who had the best body. Apart from Steiner being hilarious as usual, this feud did absolutely nothing for Rob Terry. Terry would try to regain the global title, now renamed the TV title, in a three-way match with Gunner and Murphy. I bet this match moved the needle in 2011. Anyway, unsurprisingly, Rob Terry was unsuccessful here after Gunner managed to beat the man called Murphy. Not long after this, the two least liked members of Immortal were put in a match against each other, with the loser of the match having to leave Immortal. It was Rob Terry versus Murphy. Rob Terry did manage to win the match, but after the match, Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff threw both men under the bus.
Oh, that was bad, bro. Bad.
I'm done with both of these guys. I am totally done. They're fighting for a spot in Immortal? Are you kidding me?
Dude, let's get serious.
Murphy was fired for losing this match, and it seemed like Rob Terry's time would be up soon too, as he was kicked out of Immortal. So it looked like Rob Terry was pretty much done with TNA at this point. Well, I've got some bad news for you. There's 4 more years of him left to cover. Jesus Christ. Did this guy not have any self-respect? He knew he was terrible. How could he sleep at night knowing what a failure he was? Then he was invited to team with Robbie E. You thought he was bad before? You ain't seen nothing yet. Robbie E, a man who could potentially make a worst TNA wrestlers list, was now teamed up with someone even worse than he was. How often in wrestling are two wrestlers who are so bad teamed together? Rob Terry was then renamed to be Robbie T, so it fitted in better with the Jersey Shore stuff that was going on at the time in TNA. He was mostly more of a bouncer than a teammate for Robbie E. Finally, something more suitable for this guy. Just stand still, shut your mouth and pretend you're a tree. Next up, we enter what I call the Devon days. This was a period of time where the Robbies consistently competed against Devon Dudley, week after week, and they lost every single time for the TV title. Sounds like fun? Well, it's not. They faced each other at least 10 times during this period. And guess what? Every single match was a snooze fest. I'm surprised my TV still works after the amount of snooze fest matches I had to put up with. Who kept booking this? I genuinely want to know who thought this was a good idea. I have never seen a match repeated so many times in such a short space of time and have the same terrible outcome each time. As much as people hated this team, there was one good aspect, but unfortunately it was kept online. They did a web show called The List, where they interviewed guest wrestlers to see if they could get on Robbie E's list. Yes, you heard me right, Chris Jericho stole his gimmick from Robbie E. Robbie E did the interviews and Rob Terry just stood around pulling faces and playing the straight man to Robbie E's comedy goofball routine. It was genuinely good and might have helped to get the team over, but it never made it to TV. Even if you don't like these guys, it's not a bad watch even today. Robbie E eventually grew jealous of Rob Terry. Rob Terry started doing a goofy dance after his matches whenever he won, which wasn't very often by the way. The audience actually seemed to quite like it. He also pulled Brooke Tessmacher, but this was never explained. Robbie E would look so annoyed whenever Terry danced. His face would vibrate with anger like he was going to have a stroke. If Robbie E is aspiring to be as good as Rob Terry, he's not going to go very far in the WWE. Robbie E turned on him and then Terry beat him in 2 matches and it was over after 2 years together. Good. Now can someone please, I'm begging you for the love of God, fire Rob Terry. Please see sense, this experiment has not worked. He moves in slow motion in the ring. He is absolutely shocking and common sense has to prevail here. Terry was sent to OVW to improve his wrestling skills. He had been competing regularly for 3 years at this point. Because OVW was TNA's developmental territory, everyone forgot Rob Terry existed, and the show improved without him. In 2014, weird segments started to play on the TNA show, with Mike Nux talking to some chick called Rebel. Their carnival had been damaged by floods. I think Nux and Rebel were supposed to be a couple. Nux said that he was bringing the Freak and Crazy Steve to TNA to help them.
Crazy Steve and the Freak.
No. We're not Crazy Steve. He's crazy. And the Freak absolutely freaking not. No.
Listen.
And the plan was to earn money for their struggling carnival. And they made quite an impression on their debut. They went all out with this thing. People on stilts, crazy music, Rebel doing acrobatic stuff, balloons, and oh for God. I know who this masked man is, it's Rob Terry, isn't it? This faction seemed okay, but now it's gone downhill, and the bad memories are starting to come flooding back. Rob Terry was supposed to be the strong man of the group, and he bent thin bars around his body. They did not acknowledge that it was Rob Terry under the mask. Rob Terry and Nux usually competed as a tag team together, but they were just complete losers. TNA quickly scaled back the menagerie, and soon the guys on the stilts were gone, along with the elaborate entrance. They actually put a lot of effort in it to begin with. They came up with a backstory and a faction for Nux, they gave them the extravagant entrance, and then they just ended it after a couple of months, didn't give the team a push at all. The menagerie could have been like a modern day oddities, but instead we were all just left wondering what was the point. Rob Terry's final TNA match was on Explosion towards the end of 2014, as he ironically lost to Magnus, a man who he debuted with by teaming up in the British Invasion. An update on the whereabouts of Rob Terry. He was actually still wrestling on the independents up to last year, but I think his bodybuilding contests are his priority. He doesn't look like he's coming back to Wales anytime soon, you'll be pleased to know, and he'll be staying in the US for good. You guys can keep him. With God's County just over the bridge, we don't want him anywhere near us. Alright, and just a quick message to some of you who might be slightly concerned that this is going down a path that you don't want to see. I'm absolutely cool with Top 10 Wrestling. The dude's a legit Hawkamaniac. There's no beef here. This isn't like a year ago when our channels came to blows. So this is just a friendly warning, Tom. No more videos and do not send back to this one. You know how much is riding on this. It is not worth you doing it. Because when it comes down to me and you, there's only one winner. The Hawk done job to nobody.